dominion over all the plants and animals, right? That's probably the line in the New Testament. Well, now we got to look at, right, like we got to interpret it like really, really closely. What does the dominion mean? Does dominion mean cause the entire environment to suffer and do as you please, burn all the plants, burn all the animals? Is that what dominion means for you? Or does dominion mean that you're just responsible for everything, right? You're in charge of everything. If you are the chosen one, right, that God gave you dominion, you would need to act like a god amongst the plants and animals. You could even argue that dominion means that you need to take care of everything, versus some people saying, I have dominion over plants and animals, therefore I can consume them and kill them and destroy everything if I wanted to.
Welcome back to another episode of the Plant Fuel Podcast, where we explore all things vegan. I'm thrilled to be joined by Arjun, a vegan educator and author of Wisdom Through Psychology. In this thought-provoking conversation, Arjun and I embark on a deep dive into some of the most pressing questions and arguments surrounding veganism. From addressing concerns about crop deaths to navigating discussions about the intersection of veganism with religion and culture, we leave no stone unturned. But our exploration doesn't stop there. We also tackle common misconceptions such as whether plants feel pain, and delve into the psychology behind people who hold onto these beliefs with compassion and clarity. Arjun helps shed light on these complex topics, offering insights that challenge our perspective and deepen our understanding of the vegan lifestyle. This conversation is truly one of my favourites so far, and I'm excited for you to join us as we navigate through the sea of misinformation and curiosity. If you're as captivated by Arjun's wisdom as I am, be sure to check out his socials below, the beautifully crafted videos, educational talks, and to pick up a copy of Wisdom Through Psychology. Before we dive deep into the heart of today's discussion, I want to extend my heartfelt thanks to you, our listeners, for your continued support and engagement. Your curiosity fuels our mission to educate, inspire, and empower through the power of plant-based living. If you've enjoyed today's episode, please consider leaving a review or rating on your preferred platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and continue to spread the plant-powered message. Now, without further ado, let's embark on this journey with Arjun. Get ready to expand your mind, challenge your beliefs, and dive deep into the world of veganism and psychology. Peace and plants. How are you today? Because I feel like we started this conversation. I never asked how you was.
Yeah, I'm doing great. I've been just busy with just work, content creation, gym. It's just been like on a repeat cycle. In terms of content, like my phone, like my memory is just like full of just like videos and stuff. So I'm just like, I feel like I need to stop filming because I get so excited with this directing and cinema and like how I'm gonna create content. But I'm just like, you know what? I need to like actually edit some of this stuff and post it so I can clear up some space to actually make more episodes and podcasts. So I've been kind of like putting that in the back burner. But I think, yeah. I mean, I'm going to be posting a lot more Japan content. So I'm super, super excited about that because I have just so many great vlogs of me just having my vegan journey throughout the streets in Kyoto and Tokyo. So that's kind of been on my mind this week on how I'm just going about editing those vlogs because they came out pretty nice. But yeah, other than that, just been busy with work. How about you, sir? How are you doing? Aside from the heat,
No, I'm not too bad. And as you just mentioned, the whole content thing, like I was so excited because I had so much new stuff that I'd been filming, and then it was all on a hard drive that broke.
Oh no!
So everything that I had at least a month and a half's worth of stuff, and yeah, the heat over here kind of. I did leave it out in the sun slightly by accident. Not out directly in the sun. It kind of burnt through a window and destroyed the hard drive. So I'm like, great. So everything that I did have has has disappeared. So it's back to square one.
Wow. Well, that sucks. Dang.
Yeah, it is what it is, though. It's like you can't get too hung up on it. I was just like, it was a mistake. It happened. So, back to square one. It gives me a second time around.
Yeah. I mean, it's like they say, it's all about the process, right? It's all about loving the process, not so much the destination. So as long as you have the passion for making videos and content, I think that's all that matters. That happens. I mean, I've had like my computer crash and I lost all my stuff. And I think most content creators that have been in the game for like, 5 or 6 years, they've had some sort of issue where they've lost a bunch of stuff. So it's pretty common from what I hear.
I know it is. I
Yeah.
feel like it does give me a kind of a second chance to kind of redevelop and rethink it, because I know there were some bits on there that I wasn't happy with. So I'm kind of like, you know what, I can restart it. It's fine. It's not the biggest issue. But it happens with all content creators. I live with a videographer, and he's lost so much stuff in the past. So yeah,
Yeah.
it's luckily my first time happening. But when I've seen other people do it, and like a lot more in depth kind of stuff, especially for that business, I'm like, oh, that really sucks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it sucks, but I mean, you live and you learn, right? Now I have like all my
Exactly.
stuff backed up on two devices at all times. Like I think I have like every 2 months I go through like a sync where I have like everything on my phone put onto my hard drive, and everything that's on my hard drive I put onto my phone just in case something crashes. So I have two devices just to back it up. Especially when I travel and like I film a lot, I'm just like, all right, I need to back everything up.
Oh, absolutely. How was Japan? I actually had a vegan nutritionist from Japan on here the other week, and she was saying how hard it is, but it's slowly getting better over there.
It,
How do you find it?
it's interesting because I was told by so many people like you're gonna go to Japan, there's nothing vegan there, and I was like kind of like worried and a bit paranoid, like I'm not gonna find anything vegan there. Now I will say, in terms of like the streets, it's kind of hard to find vegan stuff because the street food is just they're just cooking meat and stuff like right in front of you. But there are so many like all vegan restaurants, like all vegan ramen spots, all vegan sushi spots, and it's literally just like you go anywhere, Happy Cow, click it, boom, 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 you find it, and it's all walking distance. And then the cool thing is like you meet the vegan locals there, and then they have their own recommendations to go here this day, go there that day, go eat there, go to this cafe, blah blah blah. So it's like once you kind of like find the vegan community there by just going to just a few all vegan restaurants and cafes, you'll figure out your itinerary very quickly if you don't already have one on what to do. But food wasn't too much of an issue. Um, and to be honest, there's just so many like restaurants and cafes there because everything's really condensed. In fact, it got to a point where I did have an itinerary of vegan spots to hit. Um, and I would just be going through the streets and it'd be completely dark. Like it's just like an alley where there's no lights, no signs, no nothing. It's just completely dark. And I just like go into a corner. I see some light, coming out of the door. I go through this door and it's just like this giant street of just like commotion, noise, malls, balloons, like all this stuff happening. And then I walk down there and it's like, it's like food spots everywhere. And some of like these cafes, like the entrances are like this big, and then like right next to it it's like another entrance on the right. It's just so condensed, so it's like you could be walking for like 5 minutes but you might have just passed like 200 different places that you could eat at, and then you're going down one street and then you like turn the corner and it's like another street and it's the same exact setup, so it's just like a maze of just like food spots, restaurants, shops, cafes. um so it's really easy to find food, and maybe I don't know, like 10% of it is like gonna like have all vegan stuff, and then like maybe I'd say 30 or 40% will have like vegan options there. So it's like because there's so many spots, it's easy to find it, but like majority of it is meat, but you will find some spots if you just walk around. And it's interesting because like
It's one it's on my list of places to go this year is Japan. Like it's been one of
yeah,
those things that I've wanted to do for ages, and however, I never got around to it. But I think, yeah, 2024 is the year. Seeing I'm so close to it now as well.
yeah, definitely worth a visit. And I know a few activists that have gone there and actually lived there, so it's definitely vegan friendly, and just it's amazing, super chill and exciting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think at the moment I saw a little flight deal earlier, which was from Australia. You can fly there for however much and get your free return. So I'm like, I'm down with the free return. Like
Wait, really? You get a
that's
free
it saves money getting you there.
Wait, how? Like you, like wait, how does that work though? You book it there and you get a free return? Just
Yeah,
just
so
cuz
I'm not too
maybe?
sure how the deal works. It's by a company called Jetstar.
Oh,
However, they're paying for people, or they will pay your return flight back if you fly to Japan. So the Japanese flight
wow.
to, I think it's Tokyo, yeah, it's like $500, but your return completely free.
Wow. Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, you just save a lot of money that way. Yeah, I honestly like the flight. I'd feel like is like the most expensive part. But I mean, I'm coming from California, but like when you're there in Japan, like it's not that expensive, but it's like depends on like the quality of things you're doing as well too. But yeah, that's pretty cool. So have you been to like other places? Like I know you came from like UK, but like have you traveled around Australia?
Yeah, so actually, before I got to Australia, I was in South America and Central America, and then the States for a bit, and then flew to Australia. So I kind of made my way up from Peru all the way to Canada, and then back down to Los Angeles to fly over here. So I spent a good,
Wow.
I think, year and a half maybe, um, just in those different places, just experiencing like the cultures and the traditions and the cuisines and bits and pieces like that. And it was beautiful. South America, absolutely stunning place. Also, I don't know much Spanish, so that kind of really sucked a bit, um, because I feel like
Yeah.
it's one of those things I probably should have learned before I got there instead of just going on Duolingo, and Duolingo being the worst app for learning Spanish.
Yeah. Yeah. How was the food there in Peru?
The food in Peru, absolutely incredible. Um, they had a lot of vegan dishes as well, a lot of vegan ceviches, just done with mushroom instead of fish. Um, but the flavors absolutely incredible. Colombia, the food not so great. Um, I don't know if they're known for having such a big kind of food scene.
Yeah.
It was very bland and is what it is. But I think that was the same with your vegan dishes and your traditional Colombian dishes with me as well. It's just a very plain. They're not a huge fan of spice, and then you kind of make your way up towards Mexico, and it just starts getting more and more flavorful.
Yeah. Yeah, Mexico's definitely flavorful. I've been there a couple times and food up there, especially in Mexico City, it's great.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I found a little food truck there, a little called Paxel, a little vegan food store, and they just do tacos. They don't really do anything else. However, I've never had such flavorful tacos, and I think about that place and dream about that place at least twice a week.
That's funny. Yeah, tacos and burritos, man. I probably eat like either a taco or burrito like once a week. I love Mexican food. Very, very flavorful. Even in LA, like there's like authentic Mexican cuisines everywhere here. So I'm big on Mexican food. I think Mexican food and Asian food is probably like my primary go-tos. I've kind of cut down on like American food these days. I don't trust the American government anymore. Trust issues. I mean, for me, it's just like once in a blue moon. If it's a night out, burgers and beer it is. But yeah, I think my go-to is like for the like 90% of the time is just Asian or Mexican or Indian or even like African. I like Ethiopian food. I started recently eating that a few years ago. Pretty good. I was just gonna ask, like, just generically, so how did you like get into like nutrition and like become a nutritionist? Because I feel like that's like a really big part of like your content, and it's pretty cool.
A while ago, so I went vegan, and obviously for animal ethics, very into nutrition, and I was always very, I would say, more of a yo-yo dieter as well, where you're kind of trying out everything. And then my I would always change what I want to do as well. I'd be like, oh, I want to build muscle, or I want to become a runner. I never had like a consistent thought process, and which really, when you're eating meat products, really screws up your diet, because you're either doing like a bodybuilder bulk, or you're doing you're carving up for like runs. There was never really any consistency. And then when I went vegan, I was like, I really need to kind of. So I thought it was going to be hard. I was like, I don't know what I'm going to eat anymore. Luckily, it was very easy changing over. And then when I then got in, like, I was like, I should probably kind of go study nutrition now, because for me this is helpful. Okay, let's go study. So I went nutrition in general, and then moved on to plant-based nutrition. Didn't want to teach all foods because I feel like it's not something I align with. So I was like, I'm just going to focus predominantly on the plants and nothing else, and just be completely in amongst the plant-based vegan world, just to kind of allow people to thrive and help themselves as well. Because I think when people move over, there's just such a connect on food sources and nutrients come from. Yeah, and then you get like, thrown around in various different aspects on like things like TikTok and Instagram, where they're like, oh, you need this, you're not going to get this, and really it's quite simple. But the education system, right? You don't learn this from a young age. Like, this is now what I want to do, is I want to teach people to get everything they need on a plant-based diet, just best they can be, without these like, deficiencies and things that people assume you're going to get, and just kind of show that, people can be healthy. It's not going to be, you're not going to become a deficient human.
No, it's so
But I
true,
think,
and it's kind of ridiculous, like how people can like visually see vegans or healthy alive, 10, 15, 20 years being vegan, and they're still just believing this propaganda that they've been told when they were younger, that you're going to get deficient, you're going to lose your hair, you're not going to survive without the B12, blah, blah, blah. And I feel like with like TikTok and like IG, like a lot of people don't even take the time to actually do the research. They just see a 10-second video of someone saying, yeah, you're going to die if you go vegan. Like, all right, I'll believe it now because some guy I follow that I look up to said it. And it's just like, dude, come on, you got to like be a bit more scientific with it. And it's like a new like misconception, like every year. I feel like, I remember when the B12 craze was just everywhere. Everyone's like, oh, you're going to die if you don't get B12. And then that kind of calmed down, and then it got into iron. And then, it's like, I mean, for me personally, that's like I see like different words just being thrown around every year. But I'm curious, like with you, like what's something common that's a misconception that you hear a lot, that you have to like constantly like explain yourself? Or is it just like different every single time?
Oh, there's the main three, I think, and they go from year to year. People don't really talk about protein anymore, because I think that's been busted so many times, and it's only, you only get a few little trolls once in a while that be protein, but it's more, I think, omega-3s now. B12 still is a huge thing, and iodine. Iodine, I think, has become more popular and prevalent.
Yes,
and also people see like Paul Saladino talking about choline, and I'm like, choline's not an issue. It's a nutrient we only found out about 10 years ago. So like, it hasn't been an issue for the last however 100 or 1,000 years. Why is it an issue now? So there's these, I think people see these clips from, Paul Saladino, or to see like Joe Rogan or somewhere like that interviewing somebody that has a very unique perspective, but also doesn't have a background in nutrition or anything like that, and take that as, because I think there's one at the moment going around. I think it's a guy called Ted that was on the Joe Rogan podcast about harvesting and killing crops and things like this, and that's a big thing at the moment. And it's just, I don't understand how. This is also a guy that is a musician. He's not a farmer, scientist, anyone like that. He doesn't actually have a qualification. He's just talking crap. And these people, jump on the bandwagon. This is the issue that's coming up the most at the moment, I think, is crop deaths.
Yeah, I saw that clip, and I think people like they don't look at the logic of it. They look at the pathos more of like how Ted Nugent like gave that little speech. Like, he sounded very inspirational, very serious. Like, he sounded like he was saying with a lot of conviction, but he has absolute zero scientific, background in that. He's a musician, but people are like, oh, he's very inspirational. He's created great music. He's an icon. Therefore, he must know about everything. And it's just like, dude, like this is outside of his like credibility. Like, he like, you could talk to music about him maybe, but like crop deaths from a musician, like, this guy is not fit to be talking about science or the economy. He's a musician. So it's interesting to see how people mismatch the credentials of icons. They think just because he's an icon, just because he's saying it with such passion, and a lot of people are blowing up this clip, it must be the gospel. But it's just like, no, like, I think you got to leave that to the scientists or doctors or someone, that has credentials in that subject field.
That's the thing. I think as well, when you're then put on a platform like Joe Rogan, where you've got such a huge audience, people then use that confirmation bias as well. So they hear something they like and they align with, and they'll be like, "Oh, this is 100% the truth." I don't know where it's coming from. I don't know who it's coming from, but it sounds like it sounds like something I align with. Like, this is now going to be my truth. This is my confirmation bias, and I feel like that it can work both ways. Obviously, there's a confirmation bias on a vegan standpoint as well, but also we're also not listening to just random people. We are listening to scientists. We're listening to like nutritionists, physicians. It's not coming from some randomers. Sometimes it is, and like they're not always the greatest people to listen to. But however, we also pick the best people to listen to, because we're trying to prove people, not prove people wrong, but get the right information to kind of help our cause.
Yeah, it's true.
It lines us to what we were going to talk about in the first place, was those kind of misconceptions.
And I think like, I mean, just like as like a rule of thumb, like when it comes to misconceptions about nutrients, like I try to simplify things as much as I can, because I was at a point where I would have like, show the research about B12 and then iodine. And I feel like sometimes people are just so lazy that they won't click the links. They won't click the links to the studies or watch the documentaries, where you have to like simplify it to such a simple degree where it makes sense to them. And now what I've done with just when it comes to nutrients and supplements, every time it's like iodine or B12 or iron or heme iron, whatever it is, I just tell them this. I say, all right, so where do you think the animal that you're getting it from gets it from? Oh, we're going to be deficient in protein. Where does the animal get the protein from? Or you're going to be deficient in omega-3s. Where does the fish get the omega-3 from? It's like it doesn't just magically appear in the body of an animal in meat and then we consume it, because we are animals too. So it's like it's coming from the primary source, right? And that getting to the bottom of like, where it originated from, I think helps people kind of connect the dots a little bit more, even if they don't have the capacity to understand the biochemical, pathways and the nutrients, and understand like how everything works. I think conceptually, that's just like my rule of thumb for keeping it simple, especially for TikTok, when there's like little kids that don't really understand academia that well.
Yeah, I completely agree with that, and that is my first kind of port of call, my first stop whenever talking about nutrients, especially when it comes to things like protein, omega-3, iron. I'm like, this animal needed to get it somewhere first. They don't just create these.
Yeah.
Just like we don't create them, like no mammal on this planet just creates. They need to get it from somewhere. So that is normally the first port of call, just to kind of explain it. And then if they need to know more from that, then I will explain more and kind of get as much information to them as possible. But I feel at first, when you're speaking with people that are unaware, it is easiest to go with the easy point first and work your way up the scale, as to kind of, get bigger and bigger, and determining how much they actually want to learn.
Yeah, that's a good method of going about it, I think. Start off the base and then see how deep they really want to go, and then try to match to their level of curiosity.
Yeah, I think there needs to be a level of curiosity there as well. Otherwise, it's just a redundant argument, because if there's no curiosity there, they're not willing to learn. So you kind of have to plant that seed, even if it's small, and then just let it grow.
Exactly. Yeah. I've learned that like my first year of making content, that I got to really be able to distinguish between the people that are curious and I should actually like maybe respond to at some point, to like, actually give them my perspective, and hopefully it might create like a seed, like inception, to get them to be more curious about it, and eventually, stumble upon the research themselves. Or if they're just asking questions to troll and they're just really just there to try to, well, they think they're there to take you down, but all they're doing is just boosting your algorithm. So those guys I don't respond to. I just let them have their fun, whatever. Say what you want to say. It's just helping me spread my message.
That's the thing. Like they feel like they're starting an argument, but if anything, they're just helping push the message more. The algorithm is a great thing, because obviously you're then being put out to more people that obviously align with you, but also people that don't as well. So those people are going to get angry, kind of keep commenting as well, and boosting it more to other people like them, as well as people that we want. And it's a losing process for them.
Yeah, like it's actually insane, like the amount of energy these guys will put. Like I've seen people write like essays on comments, and I'm just like, what like drove you to write that? Like, were you really hoping to like just make me like, all right, I'm gonna read that now, I'm just gonna start eating meat because some anonymous user wrote 2 paragraphs about how I'm gonna die as a vegan within a year, even though I've been vegan for like a decade. And it's just like the amount of energy these guys put in, I'm like, you, I guess. um, it's insane. It's like it comes back to just like, you know, having credible sources, because these guys troll sometimes with so much conviction that vegans are absolutely crazy and wrong, and they're just these, you know, triggered liberals that aren't going to figure it out. And if we just keep commenting, they'll eventually get it. But it's like, no, you got to do your research. We've done the research. It might want to consider it might be the other way around. So it's just interesting to see like how people have so much conviction based on, you know, people like Ted Nugent or Joe Rogan, that aren't right people, that aren't professionals in that field, in that topic.
It is one of those things where people are just going to take what they want. Let them do what they need to do. Because the thing is, like, we are researching as much as I can, like as much as you can, because when you do go vegan, you at first sometimes you do question yourself whether you are able to get all these nutrients, and then you start to research and realize it is a thing that all the medical associations say it. It's not like it's just some random guy that's told us. We're literally going into most dietary associations, being like, this is where I get this from, this is where I get this from. And I would say we're probably more knowledgeable than, you know, the majority of people that do eat meat, because they don't look into where to get these things. Obviously, you know, you got your athletes and bodybuilders and people like that who obviously know exactly what they want to build muscle. But for the majority of people that are just kind of on the, especially the standard American diet, they just assume that this food has a ton of nutrients, when we all know it doesn't. It's just focusing on what we need. And obviously, if you move away from like a standard American diet or like the English diet, which is very much the same, it's just westernized culture, not a nutritious diet at all.
Yeah.
I feel like where I've now researched, and this is before I even studied nutrition as well, before I did that, I was like, I need to find out where I get these things from, what I need, and how to get them. And through 4 years of, at that point, looking into it, I now know exactly what I need. But at first, like, I had no idea where to start, and I think most people don't, because most people don't think about like, especially things like B12, because it's not a vegan issue, it's a worldwide issue.
I think I remember it was like I saw a statistic that said 35% of the world, or Americans at least, 35% of Americans are B12 deficient, but only 6% are vegan. So it's like, how can that be a vegan issue if the majority of people are B12 deficient already? So it's like, it's common sense.
It literally is. There's a lot of these, especially iron deficiency as well. Iron deficiency, there's a huge population of people that are iron deficient, but with such a low percentage of vegans, it's not a vegan issue. It's a worldwide issue, and it's down to the foods that we have and we eat, because they're not the most nutritious anymore as much as they used to be, where we're kind of, you know, recreating foods, or we're like your fruit and vegetables where they've been developed over time and we've kind of spliced them for, you know, better juiciness or to be bigger. You're losing out on nutrients because you've been splicing and mixing and matching, and you're killing nutrients that there once would have been, let's say 60 years ago, when that probably would have been the healthier option.
I remember reading about that. Now it's like you're supposed to get like fruits that are like a lot smaller, and they have like a lot more, they're like packed with a lot more nutrients, like pears, versus like these like Honey Crisp apples, which are like so massive, but they're just like bred to be as sweet as possible. And they have a lot lower nutrients in them. I remember hearing about that as well. That is fortunate, but I wonder why like they felt the need to like, well, I guess it's because it just looks bigger, so it's like more appeasing. It's like, oh, it's a colorful red apple that's huge, it must be better deal for me. But it's like, well, nutrient wise, it's definitely not a better deal.
I think we do look at it from kind of a perspective of beauty, our food. Whereas our food, when it's grown, it isn't the nicest to look at sometimes. But the more beautiful they can make it, the more they're going to make money from it. So, like over here, obviously people have been, different kinds of wax on apples and pears to make it look shinier and better, plumpier and juicier. And time we've recreated and developed this new 21st century apple, sorry. You've really you've taken away from what it used to be. And I think that's the same that's all our foods, no matter what it would. Things would have been healthier years and years ago, but we're now in a food system where that's not a thing anymore.
Interesting. Like I sometimes get people like opposing veganism because they're like, oh, they're modifying our fruits and there's wax on our apples and there's pesticides on our vegetables, and being vegan's not that healthy. Like, therefore, it's not healthy just because they've modified a few fruits and put some pesticides. But then again, it's like, well, what are the animals eating? Are they eating pesticide crops? Are they eating those things as well? And it's like, I don't think I've actually ever heard of anyone getting cancer or heart disease or or any issue because they ate too many apples with wax on them, or too many vegetables that had, like, have you? I don't think there's actually a case of someone dying from being a raw vegan.
I've never seen anything that's ever mentioned that. I read a lot of studies and I've never seen anything along the lines of, obviously, if you eat too many fruit or if there's the pesticides or the fertilizers that are used. I've never seen anything. But also, it's the same as like the whole protein thing. Like, we don't have hospitals full of protein deficient vegans. It's not a thing. They don't exist.
Exactly. Yeah, and meanwhile, you have hospitals full of people with heart issues and diseases and cancers and osteoporosis, which is linked to just bad animal product diets. So it's interesting how people deflect it as if like, oh, we can't go vegan because produce is bad these days. Well, produce is the best you can get right now. Like that's like your best option out of all the food choices you have. What are you gonna eat? Crackers? Or are you gonna eat like meat like that? You think that's better than produce? Come on.
I think people just move away from what they don't want to kind of see true, and just kind of go along with what kind of the food that they've been eating the whole entire time, and just kind of believing that one life kind of matters more than anything else, and this is how I'm going to live. But at the same time, you're going to develop issues down the line, and it's wild how some people think. And obviously, I'm guessing that obviously, you've got a whole book on the way people think. So
yeah. It's not particularly about veganism, but there's a lot of like hints and suggestions toward veganism, and like the way people create misconceptions, and the way a lot of, like, we were talking about confirmation bias, how there's like so many different biases that kind of get us to live in a lot of delusions, and that's like a big part of like what I talk about. So it's a book that's kind of preparing you mentally to think outside of the box, to think outside of the matrix, as I like to call, right? Like the whole propaganda machine that you've been raised upon. So yeah, it is wild how people think, but arguably it's not always people's, like, it's not even their, like, there's like a saying in psychology that too much psychology when you can't get mad at people for why they do what they do. And it's because you understand why they troll. You understand why they hate you. They understand why they disrespect people. And it's because of the society they've been raised in, the people they've been raised in, the propaganda they've been fed. And a lot of us are just products of everything we've consumed that we've been raised upon. And at one point, unless someone kind of like shows you the veil, they show you what's behind the curtains and how you got programmed, they're not going to be able to reprogram themselves unless someone at some point tells them this is how programming works. And then they're like, oh shoot, my whole life I got programmed to do this, I got programmed to do that. And then they are finally equipped with the conscious psychological tools to break out of that matrix. But until they know that they've been programmed, it's really, really hard to convince yourself that you might be living in a possible delusion of some truths just because you've heard, people around you say it. And I mean, one thing I've learned and I see every day is like the most potent form of marketing is word of mouth, because we're humans, right? We're human creatures. We love to socialize. So even if there's like a study out there that has like, thousands of trials, you have a bias to listen to someone's words just because you know them, just because you're familiar with them, right? Familiarity bias. It might be a family member. It might be Joe Rogan. So it's like just the word of mouth, even if it's this complete BS, is a little bit more convincing for you to create a reality, even if it might put you in a delusion, versus actual logic and reason that's written out on paper and gone through rigorous study and, face the, brutal scrutiny and skepticism of a lot of scientists to really get to that truth. But in actuality, I feel like we got to be more conceptually driven if we really want to like live in our true values, or values that are truthful.
Yeah, I think with that as well, you're with people's minds as well. There's such complexity there as well. Like people are strung along by their habits and their cultures and their emotions as well. There's such a big play in how people perceive life, and especially things like cultures, the cultural norms. They really just kind of play a big part in why someone does something, why somebody can't move away from that, and it's very complex. And I think it's more habit and comfort.
Yeah, habit and comfort, I think, is definitely one of the big players. And these things get formed from just, I think initially it gets formed from just people like doing it in front of them, and they hear word of mouth, it's okay to do this. And once they have like the comfort of people's words saying that it's okay to eat this, it's okay to do this, then they start imitating those things. And then eventually, as the years progress, they have it a habit. And there's some kid, like there's so many cases where there's like a kid that's like, I don't know, 7 or 8 years old, and they don't want to eat meat because they heard it's bad for them to eat meat, but then their whole family's eating meat. So now they're like, oh shoot, I have to do it because like my mom, dad, sister, brother, everyone's eating it, and now I need to eat it. Fast forward 10 years, now it's a habit. Now it's part of their culture. Now it's part of their entire identity. And if they were to hear that same information again, that eating meat is bad or it's unethical or it's not healthy, they're going to be more prone to reject it now, because that long time ago when they were told from their parents, it started from there and turned into a habit after all those years. And now it's just, that's all they know. It's familiar to them. So they're going to defend that programming at that point. They're not even going to question it anymore. Now it's like, all right, it's a habit. Why do I need to think about it? Why do I need to put all this cognitive stress to rethink my whole life? I just want to just leave me alone. I'm going to make some excuse or deflect it and just, move on. So that's a very common narrative I see happen with a lot of folks. And just like how they get raised, because I do a lot of street activism and talk to them like directly one-on-one with people. And that's probably like the most common story I hear in terms of how people get that habit formed of just consuming meat, even if they might subconsciously kind of sense that there might be something wrong there in terms of their own health or in terms of the ethics. So it's interesting to see how that kind of programming takes years and years to form, and then breaking them out of it is like even like a more of a sophisticated issue, because you got to really show them the entire roadmap of how you got put into this lifestyle and how the whole world got put into that lifestyle, so they can kind of see the whole matrix as what it is, and use their own logic and reason to deduce what the true reality is.
It kind of brings up the question of what's the best way to break them out the habit. And that's the thing, was obviously these are so ingrained in our cultures and societies, and if someone's been doing it 30 years, how do they break away from that?
That's a good question. I think, I mean, personally, my answer to that would be to like equip them with tools. Um, and I could be biased, but I would say like understanding psychology and how human behavior works, how consumerism works, like that would be my go-to. But I don't think you necessarily need to know psychology to be a vegan because, not every vegan's like, studied psychology. But I think something along the lines of like understanding how their thoughts influence their behaviors and getting them to see cognitive dissonance. I think a lot of people use the Socratic method when they do activism. As far as I've seen, like Earthling Ed, he's like big on the Socratic method of questioning, which is just, you keep asking them questions until they come to their own truth rather than argue with them. You just say, hey, so why do you eat meat? So do you think it's okay? Do you think, would you eat meat in this circumstance? So you just keep questioning them until they get to their core baseline morality. And then they can kind of see their own morality for what it is, which they probably wouldn't do otherwise. So it's like the Socratic method can be a great way to kind of self psychoanalyze yourself and see what you're really made out of or what your ethics and morality is really made out of and kind of deduce the logic in there, because that kind of cuts through all the culture and cuts through all the tradition and cuts through all the BS programming, because now you're getting to the core of who you are as a person. I think, I mean, but there's probably like dozens of ways to, break someone out of it. But I think that's a common way I've seen and I've used too. So it's definitely worked with me when I have these conversations with people, especially with family and friends, assuming that they're
Yeah, I think
curious about it.
especially the way that you said Earthling Ed does it as well. Obviously, it is questioning until they kind of come to their own truth, and he has such a beautiful way of doing it. Because every video that I watch, people do question themselves by the end. I don't think I've ever watched one of his videos where somebody hasn't come out the other side, then questioning what their morality was towards, animals and their life and how it's working. And just when you do ask those questions, people don't normally have an answer because it's just ingrained, and we're just like, oh, this is what it is. It's the same with farmers. They don't really think when they're like fourth or fifth generation farmers, they're like, this is how it's always been, this is why we're doing it. But they've never stopped to question why they're doing it, how they're doing it, what exactly it's doing to animals, environment, because it's just been there from day one for them.
Yeah, exactly. I think, yeah, I like his approach the most, and I think you're right. Like every video I've seen, like the person at the other end always comes out like questioning themselves, like, okay, like am I really in the right here? Am I? Like, they come in so confident, ready to like destroy Earthling Ed, and then they leave just like, damn, that guy's pretty good. Like, I think I might be wrong here. He's really good at bypassing people's egos and getting them to see who they are. And I think that's the best way people learn too. Like when you give them the answer, it's like being very religious. It's almost like telling them, all right, this is the answer, and if you don't believe this, you're inferior. It can come off as condescending, but when you allow someone, and you kind of have to be really patient to be able to pull this off, you kind of question someone's morality, and you're just as non-judgmental as possible, but you allow them to come to their truth. They're a lot more receptive to finding that truth themselves when you give them the patience and opportunity to come to that truth. Because I think the truth is much more powerful when you discover it yourself versus someone else telling you, yeah, go here, go there, watch this, and you'll be vegan. Then it's just like too like, okay, like there's no way you can just, downplay it like that. So I think it's important for there to be some degree of patience with people to come to that revelation at some point, and then you just being like a facilitator of like kind of giving them the tools to break out of that programming and understand what plant-based living, veganism, and nutrition, everything's all about.
Absolutely.
I think you froze.
I also realized that we've come this far in and we have not introduced you at all. We've just started talking and gone on a few tangents. And
I thought you were going to say we've come this far and we weren't recording. I was like, oh my God.
Oh no, we're recording, but yeah, no, we've come this far. We haven't actually introduced you, or let alone kind of spoken about what we're actually going to speak about. We've kind of gone through little tangents about it. So 45 minutes in.
Yeah.
Who are you?
So my name is Arjun, also known as Arjunius. I am a author. I am an activist and an educator, primarily known on social media. And yeah, I've been a vegan for about 10 years, making content for, I have no clue, like 5, 6, 7 years, something like that. But yeah, I've been in the game for a minute, and yeah, majority of my content is short form reels. And in the past, I did a lot of long format content, which I'm kind of just repurposing into short form reels. So that's the gist of what I create.
I came across you. The way that you come across is so well done as well. It's not judgmental. It's fun. It's movie like as well.
Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because like at first I wanted to just be like a normal educator, like just like a professor, uh, straight out of university, and then I realized like I kind of wanted to put my own personality into it. And I think cinema and movies, as you could probably tell from my videos, like it's like a big part of like just me. So it tends to come out in my content in like interesting ways. I don't know how to explain it. It comes out. It just like you could tell like, okay, this guy's a Star Wars fan. This guy is making some Oppenheimer references or something like that. So it's like if you're a movie fanatic or if you're like into pop culture, anime shows like that, you'll get the references. So I tend to incorporate that into my teaching. And yeah, it's entertainment, right? So it's like I wouldn't want to watch content that I wouldn't want to watch. So if I'm going to make content, I need to make it in a way that speaks not only to other people but speaks to me too. So it's something that I can, rewatch the video I made a year ago, and I'm like, okay, I'd be down to watch that because it's entertaining, educational, and sometimes inspirational. That's kind of my philosophy in my content creation game.
Yeah, I think when it comes to content creation, it is trying to create things that people actually want to watch and people is going to resonate with people, and it is very hit and miss sometimes. My content last year better than the content it was this year when I'm speaking a lot more. Because it's a slightly longer form. It is very all over the place. It's finding that really sweet niche of what people want to see, and I think you've really narrowed it down completely to exactly what people like, what people need to know, what they want to see, and having it in such a format that is educational but at the same time pleasing to the eye as well.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I learned this in school when I was doing my master's in psychology that like the most engaging form of content, like at least right now, it's just video form, short video form, because you're hearing things, you're hearing sounds, you're seeing visuals, you're on your phone, you're in the comfort of your bed sometimes. So it's like that happens to be like one of the most engaging forms of accessing information. And there was a time where people would read books, they would read studies, they would like, watch documentaries. And now it's like the attention span's getting shorter and shorter. And people want all areas of their brain engaged a lot more. So it's like they want to see something that's entertaining, inspirational, something that might be creepy, something that might be intense. So it's like they want like all the different emotions. So I kind of like took that philosophy of consumer psychology into my content in terms of trying to, I guess, just making it engaging and not boring. I mean, if I'm putting it in simple terms, layman's terms. So that's kind of like my way of approaching it. Like, how do you make this piece of content engaging? That's, like you said, like appeasing for the eyes and also for like your senses. So as many parts of your brain can be activated. And going off of that, like when more regions of your brain are activated when you're digesting information, whether it be from videos or music, the more you're able to remember it, right? So it's interesting. So it's like when a piece of information is presented to you, but it's like through like a boring study that you're reading versus an actual video that's like engaging, you're more likely to remember it just because more parts of your brain were activated when you consumed that piece of information and content. And I think you do a pretty good job at that too. Like the way you speak in your videos, like it's very like straight to the point. Hey, my name's Callum, and it's like you're using your hands and your body language. So it's like very engaging in a way that just like, all right, this guy knows what he's talking about. I want to listen to what he has to say. And you kind of just give that golden nugget and then boom, it's done without having to go into like, like a 13-page study, which is nothing wrong with studies, but I just remember when I was in school, they would make us read like, like a 10-page study, and then at the end of it, it's like, yeah, so because of this, that's the conclusion. Like, dude, like I read all this data and stats and all this stuff just for that one little piece of practical knowledge. And I'm just like, dude, we need a way to simplify all this information, because even my attention span is getting lower and lower.
I think when it does come to studies, like especially when it in nutrition, you will read like 2, 3, 4 pages of like really knowledgeable stuff that I sometimes don't understand, and then there'd be the conclusion of like 2 sentences, and I'm kind of like, oh, that's what I needed to know, was literally these 2 sentences that break down everything that's happened, and sometimes the study is non-conclusive. I'm like, great. We put out a poll the other day about exactly what people, or arguments that people have, or they've heard of around veganism, and how to kind of break those down, and obviously acknowledge people's opinions, and how they can kind of not fight back but educate people. And I think we've got quite a few here, which I think we should probably dive into, because at the same time I think it's also educating for us, because there's quite a few things here that I think if we don't speak about enough, then it gets overrun by, as we say, these kind of Joe Rogan kind of like reels where you see them about like crop deaths, and we're kind of like, you know what, we'll see those and we'll be like, oh, maybe we are harming more animals, and then kind of go back to, a meat eating lifestyle. So I think it's like breaking down these kind of like arguments would probably, help people to develop a better understanding of what they can speak about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it just equips people too. Like, it gives them like some information to prepare themselves, because as a vegan, or if you're plant-based, you're going to get attacked at some point. And if you don't have a good way of articulating your points to all these misconceptions, it's just going to be stressful. So it's like knowing what the misconception is, first of all, and knowing how to articulate it. Like, those 2 very, very important things.
I think the first one to tackle is definitely the crop deaths. I think this one definitely comes up the most lately.
Yeah, that one interview with Joe Rogan and Ted Nugent had just blown this out of proportion, and they really thought they canceled vegans. And I've made God knows how many videos about this, and it's just, yeah, it's ridiculous. Earthing Ed, Joey Carbstrong, like all like the big iconic activists have even made tons of videos about that. But people are just so like convinced that like, oh, vegans kill animals, therefore we shouldn't go vegan at all. But they're not looking at the numbers. They're not looking at the economics to this whole situation at all. How do you respond to it?
So I think obviously the idea that the vegan diet is criticized because of obviously harvesting crops obviously leads to deaths of small animals, rodents and insects, and it is a valid point, but no form of agriculture is obviously completely free, but they're really taking it out of context. So when we do put it back into context, we need to kind of understand the scale and intention. Yes, obviously small animals may be harmed by like crop harvesting, but the scale of the harm is significantly less compared to the direct intentional harming of animals for meat. And there's a big difference between unintentional harm as a side effect of harvesting crops and the systematic breeding of like raising and slaughtering animals.
Yes.
And especially when we think about it, like the majority of crops we grow are globally used for livestock, not humans, and it's obviously a hugely inefficient process. So we've grown these crops using the resources of the land just to feed animals, in which we then eat. So by cutting out that middleman and eating plants directly, we actually obviously reduce the overall demand of crops, and consequently the harm for animal, wildlife in agriculture areas as well. So although if the concern is really about reducing harm to animals, then like moving towards a plant-based diet is still making the most sense, because it's minimizing the impact of our food choices. We're not eliminating it entirely, and I think this is where people think. I think this is where people think that we have it in our heads that everything is, fine and dandy and nothing gets killed. I think we're all aware that things still get killed. This is not, it's not completely cruelty free, but it's better than, what we are doing.
Yeah, 100%. 100%. And I think you hit the nail on the head right there, like with all the points. And I think my favorite is the fact that this is like not intentional harm. Like we're not consuming the byproducts of these rodents and small animals in the crop debts. We're not asking the farmers to kill them. When you're consuming meat and dairy, you are basically paying a hitman to kill them, because that's the only way you're going to get those byproducts of the animal, versus getting an apple that was, used that came from an apple tree, which was grown on a field that was cleared and killed a bunch of rodents in that field, is completely different. That's like a systematic issue. It's not that you're paying someone to kill them. And there's one point I think Earthling Ed had brought up, that a lot of like the rodents, like rats and like mice and like squirrels that are in these fields, they will run away before they actually get like plowed to death, right? So it's like a lot of these animals have the ability to move out the way, but it's just the way these researchers are measuring their populations. They're measuring it in terms of like that field. Like, all right, there was 10 mice in this field and now they've all disappeared, so they must be dead. So it's like you got to also look at like how they're getting all the data. Like, how are they actually measuring it? Did these rats all die? Are they counting the amount of bodies that they found? Or are they just counting a sample of that population in this forest or jungle or crop area or meadows, and then using that to predict how many of them have died? And sometimes they might just be going extinct because the field's not there anymore for them to get food, and it might not even be that these machines kill them. It might just be that they don't have like places to eat. So it's like there's just so many variables that go into like how they die. And it's definitely not like you said, it's not at the scale as what's happening in these factory farms, because every single animal that's born in a factory farm will die. They don't have the opportunity to run away. They don't have the opportunity to leave that field and go into another habitat. They're going to die via, a knife or getting shot in the head. So it's like, we know how they're going to die, and there's definitely going to be casualties. And like you said, it's inefficient because all these animals are eating the same crops and contributing to the crop debts that we're going to be getting our produce from. And I think it was like 40% or something. I think the number changed, like 30 or 40% of all the food that's produced gets consumed by animals in factory farms. So it's just like, it's so inefficient. You're killing more, you're contributing to more crop debts by eating a single meal of animals, a single meal that has animal products in it, versus just having a meal that's completely plant-based. So if you actually cared about those animals, you would be vegan, because you're contributing to less suffering in those crop debts. Simple math.
I think as well, people kind of missed the point, and they missed the bigger picture. And we're not trying to achieve perfection. We're just trying to reduce the overall harm of animals. Like there's no such thing as a perfect world, and there's no such thing as a perfect vegan. But we're not trying to achieve the perfection. It's just we're just reducing, or significantly reducing, the amount of harm and suffering we do cause. So when the food is being ground up and for the animals, yes, there's going to be those there's going to be deaths there, but we are paying into a industry that is going to be feeding these more, and because of that industry, this is why there are more crop deaths. It's not a perfect system, but there's not going to be a perfect system as of the moment.
Yeah, 100%. And you're right. Like, veganism is not about being perfect, although they'll use that as like an argument because they're just trying to find a way to cancel vegans, right? Because no one wants to see the hero succeed. They want to see the hero fall. So they're like, oh yeah, vegans, you're trying to save the world. well, we're going to try everything we can in our power to cancel you and to make you fall. But if you just simply look at the definition of what vegan is, right? Veganism is a philosophy and way of living that seeks to exclude, as far as possible and practical, all forms of exploitation and cruelty to animals. So the key word here is as far as possible and practical. That does not mean perfect. That means as far as possible and practical in your account of what you consume. And if people just like understood what the definition was, they would realize that, situations like this, you are still a vegan if that crop death had led to some death. And people are just like, they're more interested in cancel culture than they are in actual, the philosophy of certain movements like veganism and what, being plant-based is about when it comes to diet. So yeah, it's a very interesting attitude of our time that we live in, where people kind of just reject the logic and reason with, definitions, with nutrition, with science, and they're just trying to find a way to make it as political as possible in a way that can, say they're the good guy and we're the bad guy, or they're trying to make it really black and white type of thinking, and it's not as black and white as people want it to be. It's more sophisticated than that, I think.
Yeah, I actually think with crop deaths as well, it actually leads us to the one of the second ones we got asked, which was plant sentience. Because obviously, with these people that believing plants have the same feelings, we're then contributing to more animals being killed, crop deaths, and plants with feelings, and then animals as well. So apparently, we're then contributing to more. And when it comes to, like, obviously plant sentience as well, they respond to stimuli, but compared, like, that's not the same feelings as having pain and awareness, and they don't have a brain or a central nervous system. So I don't understand how people can throw that into the same logic as, killing an animal to killing a plant being the same thing. But I want to know how you break that down for the especially with plant sentience.
Yeah, I think with the first thing, what I try to do is understand why they're even bringing that up, because it already just sounds like utter nonsense, So I'm just like trying to figure out, like, okay, why is this person first saying this? Are they trying to say that I'm a hypocrite, or are they trying to say that they genuinely think that all life has to suffer in order to be eaten? But I think what they're trying to get at is that all living beings are consumed by another living being, except the primary producers, right? But that's not the same as like sentience. So sentience is like the missing variable here, right? Like, can it feel things? And people are, I think, deflecting in a way. Or most people are. They're deflecting to try to justify that you're just as bad as me, right? In order to kind of remove their guilt. So it could just be an insecurity that they feel, right? That they feel guilty that they're consuming animals that they know are suffering. So they're trying to show that, well, I think plants suffer as well, and they prove that they can sense things. And people, like you were saying, they conflate the ability to sense stimuli with the ability to process pain through a central nervous system or a peripheral nervous system or even a nerve net like fish. And I think when people understand that you need, I think it's common sense, but it's like a lot of people don't think pain, like you need pain receptors to feel pain. But people think that, if you could sense your environment, you can pain and you have consciousness. And the way I break it down is like you can like cut grass and it will grow back, right? It can sense that I got cut. It might grow back thicker. It might grow back taller now that I got cut. It's similar to like your hair, right? When you go to the barber and you get cut, and if you keep shaving, your hair, it might get thicker over time because your hair kind of senses it's being cut at some point, but you don't feel pain in your hair at all. When your hair is cut, you don't have any nerves to process it, although your body might be able to sense some of it, right? So it's similar to that. I think that's like an analogy I use to just kind of simplify things, although it's not like perfectly accurate. And then I obviously tell them about, like you need pain receptors to feel pain, and you need a brain to be able to process that. And then the third thing I do is, like, if they still don't get it, I kind of get into like the biology of it, in that plants want you to eat them, right? They create fruits so that herbivores can consume those fruits and then consume that seed and then shit it out somewhere, so that the poop basically fertilizes the seed so it grows. And without someone eating those fruits, the tree wouldn't be able to actually spread its seeds. So the whole system is like kind of co-evolved with herbivores. The system of plants producing seeds, vegetables, fruits, and herbivores consuming those, or frugivores consuming them. So the whole system like is based on consumption. It's like a what do you call it? Um, blanking on the term. I think it was like coevolent, or whatever the term is. But basically, like, plants want you to eat them, right? And if they didn't, they would be poisonous, because there are some plants that are poisonous that you're not supposed to eat. And it's interesting because a fruit, although it's good for us, although we can consume it, is actually poisonous to some other animals, right? So there's a lot of things that like a plant will create that only certain animals can eat, and other animals, it's poisonous to them. So it's just like, if you look at like the kind of like the way nature's already set up, the answer is already there. Who wants you to be eaten and who doesn't want to be eaten by you? Because certain animals can help, pollinate. Like a bee pollinates a flower. It kind of needs the bee there to help it spread its genes. And biology is all about mating. So it's like, when it comes to mating, plants, animals, they have the ability to co-evolve with other creatures so that they have a better chance at survival in their ecological environment. So those are the three main things I kind of go off of. And it kind of, I guess, depends on like how much they know about biology, or how much they know about, nutrition, nerves, neurology. So I kind of try to meet people where there are with that type of science. Yeah, that was like a long answer, but
Yeah, I think
what's
a
like,
good point there.
yeah. Okay, cool.
So yeah, I think for me it's really like, as I will normally mention a lot of the points that you've just mentioned, but also being realistic about science here. Like, there's a significant difference between pulling a carrot out the ground and slaughtering an animal. Like, if somebody's telling me they're the same thing, then I don't know if I can have a conversation with that person, because there is such a dissonance away from, like, a cognitive dissonance. If you think that pulling a carrot or pulling a lettuce, whatever, is the same as slitting a throat, then there's issues there. Like, and I don't think anybody actually truly believes that. So if they truly believe that, let's say for instance,
I was just going to say, if you ever want to test it, because I've gotten that answer before. I always ask them. So first, I would just agree with them. Like, sure. So you think cutting a carrot is the same as cutting the throat of a pig? And they'd be like, yeah, it is. And they're just trying to like prove a point, or they're trying to feed their ego. Then at that point, I would be like, all right, then why do we censor animals being cut open, and why don't we censor a vegetable being cut? Like, why are you reluctant to watch the documentary Dominion, but you're totally okay with watching Gina's 30-minute meals or Gordon Ramsay cutting vegetables on TV? Like, why is that shown to little kids, but why can't the kids watch animals being cut? If they're the same thing, and then we're just watching food being prepared, food being cut and prepared for us to consume, why do we need to censor it? Boom. And then see what the response is.
yeah, I've never thought about it that way. Yeah, not at all. I think that's such a good way of explaining to people as well, because I've never thought about, obviously, in my head, like my reasoning behind was, if someone was driving down a highway and a dog drove in front of them, ran in front, and there was grass on the side, they're going to drive into the grass. But if they cared that much, like, they wouldn't have driven. They would have swerved a completely different way and not done the dog or the grass. But you know which one they're going for, and that was normally the way I was going to go about it. But the way you just explained that was, well, perfect, I guess.
Yeah.
But I never thought about it in a way of, obviously we're just watching this on a constant day-to-day basis. Food's being chopped up, and we don't think anything about it. But obviously, if there's a slaughterhouse video, nobody wants to watch that.
Exactly. The reason I bring that is just to be more provocative. I think that example with running into the deer and grass is pretty common and that everyone can relate to. But I noticed people are a lot more like protective with what, their kids or their nieces and nephews are going to consume. And I've done lectures at elementary schools before. So I kind of see that when it comes to kids, they're very they're much more protective of what they're allowed to see and what they're not allowed to see. So it's if you're censoring it from these young kids and you're censoring it because it's going to traumatize these, elementary kids, why are you not censoring a carrot being cut? So it's it's already there subconsciously, but they're just trying to pretend like they're the same. And once they, realize that, I would never want a child or my child, especially because they're going to be more protective of their kids, right, to watch an animal being killed because I know it's going to traumatize them versus an adult. So it's that kind of makes them feel a little bit more uncomfortable. Would you feel comfortable showing a 6-year-old an animal being cut open alive, knowing that it's going to traumatize them, knowing that they're going to just be absolutely disgusted and they're never going to forget that? And is that the same as showing them a carrot being cut? So it's that's a way to kind of provocatively make them think about it, especially if they're a parent. I've noticed it works really well with parents, but with teenagers, not so much.
I think when it comes to teenagers, it's they like to show off at the same time. And when you have to have a conversation with them, they just kind of agree with their friends and just kind of try to stand out and be
Herdman.
Humorous in front of their friends. I've watched a lot of videos with, at the moment, Tash Peterson. And she's having conversations with these kids in Australia. And a lot of them are just playing up because of the group of about 5 of them, and they're trying to kind of show who can be the funniest one. So when it does come to teenagers, I think there's different ways of doing it with them, because it's hard. Because you're at that age when you're trying to impress other people, you're kind of figuring out where you fit in as well, and you're kind of, you don't want to move away from social norms because you might be seen as the outcast as well, especially in that time of life between the 13 and I'd say not so much 19. I think from the ages of 13 to kind of 16 are those really prevalent moments where people are trying to find themselves. When people are 18, 17, 18, they seem to kind of move off in their own direction of what they want to do because they realize they can have separate lives from their friends.
Oh, yeah, that is true. It kind of comes back to knowing who you're talking to. You would present the information to teenagers differently to how you would present someone in their 20s, differently to someone who's in their 30s and 40s, depending on their circumstances and environment. Because it's at the end of the day, it's really meeting people where they're at, right? What do they believe in? What do they value? If they have kids, they probably value their kids the most, right? If they have, friends, they probably value what their friends think the most. So it's knowing what people believe, what their philosophy is kind of the language needed to truly get them to understand reality. And sometimes it's not even science. That's the most annoying part that I've learned, that some people are just not scientifically based. They're not about logic and reason. They're all about biases. They're all about what their tribe that they're in tells them to do. And that's kind of how they base their entire reality. They base their entire truths off of. And it's tricky in that situation because you really gotta be able to convince their whole circle to understand your point before they're actually convinced themselves. But I tend to focus a lot more on people that are open-minded and new age thinkers, because I feel that's where you get the most progress. And I remember reading this somewhere, but it's every revolution when it comes to changing the fabric of habits and changing the fabric of attitudes, you'd really just need 6 to 12% of an entire population to be converted to that type of thinking, to convert it to that type of revolt, and then it just snowball effects by itself. So it's like if you just focus on the people that are curious enough, it's going to happen by itself. Even and then once enough people are, in that revolution, in that community, then even the people that were stubborn, even the people that were like stuck in the little circles, they're going to see the world around them change. And even though they don't want to do it, they're going to be like, okay, the entire world's changing. Now I have to do it because I don't want to be the minority anymore. I don't want to be the outlier. So that's kind of how I'm seeing it, like in like the long term, game, long term picture at least. There's always going to be people that are very stubborn, and sometimes it's teenagers as well. But I feel like as long as we're focusing the education on like the right target audience, like the open-minded people, it's going to naturally, find its way to everyone at some point via the snowball effect.
So obviously when it comes to like these different groups of people, I think religion comes into it quite strongly as well, with some kind of groups of people where it is very much, we're going to do exactly as, let's say, the Bible says or another book says, and these people are very stuck in their ways. Obviously, there's people that are very obviously open-minded as well. And myself, I grew up in a very Christian household when I was younger, and I think when you're reading out a book that also does contradict itself in many ways, it's hard to see and do what or work out what you're meant to be doing. Because I know in the Bible, in the Old Testament, for instance, it's very much you shouldn't eat animals. Animals are here to live alongside you, and then in the New Testament, it's like fuck that, eat what you want.
Yeah.
And I think then there has to be a different approach as well when it comes to religion, because it is very set in the ways we are following. Some people are following exactly as the book says, and how do we really kind of work towards helping people of religion to kind of develop a more compassionate understanding of obviously veganism, because obviously the interpretations and practices that obviously evolve over time, but many religions that have principles and it's really about compassion and respect for life and stewardship for the earth. However, when you put it into the perspective of not eating animals, that's a no-go.
Yeah. I think the best and worst part about religion is the same thing, and that's that it can be interpreted the way you want it to be interpreted. And I've done actually like a long format video on different religions, arguing that, reinterpreting it and arguing it in favor of veganism. So I've done it on Christianity, I've done it on Hinduism, Buddhism, um, Islam. I've even done it on Satanism. I've done it like a lot of different religions, which I probably could do even more on. But I think every religion at some point, like if you look at the core values, you can find the message of compassion, ethics, and doing what's right for your body to really like harmonize it with like what nature intended you to eat. And I mean, I think the most obvious one for me, just looking at it like as someone who wasn't grown Christian, um, just like why is there a New Testament? Like why did we need to rewrite the word of God? Like why wasn't the Old Testament good enough? If that was the word of God, who created the New Testament? From my understanding, it's like some king in like the 11th century decided to just rewrite the whole thing, or like, and like a bunch of his scholars to rewrite it in a way that fit their criteria. So I'm just kind of like, I think if you're going to be a Christian, like a real Christian, you would want to follow it from like the original testament that basically said, every seed bearing plant is for us to consume, and it had nothing to do with consuming animals, because that's like the OG way of doing it. But I guess, people's interpretations change, and now the New Testament is more popularized. But even with the New Testament, I would argue, because I think temptations has always been a sin of Christianity, right? and doing things that are unethical, doing things that can, cause violence, thou shalt not kill. Like, you can interpret these things as saying that we are giving into temptations by consuming meat. Because even if God created, what was it? Something about like he gave you dominion over all the plants and animals, right? That's probably the line in the New Testament that a lot of
Yeah, something along the lines of that.
yeah, something along the lines of that meat eaters will say, well, it says in the Bible that God gave us dominion over plants and animals. Well, now we got to look at, well, right, like we got to interpret it like really, really closely. What does dominion mean? Does dominion mean um, cause the entire environment to suffer and do as you please, burn all the plants, burn all the animals? Is that what dominion means for you? Or does dominion mean that you're just responsible for everything, right? You're in charge of everything. That's what I would argue, that you actually, if you are the chosen one, right, that God gave you dominion, you would need to act like a god amongst the plants and animals, bring order to the kingdom of animals, bring order to the kingdom of plants, like Avatar: The Last Airbender, just bridge everything together so it's like in harmony, right? So you could even argue that dominion means that you need to take care of everything, versus some people saying, I have dominion over plants and animals, therefore I can consume them and kill them and destroy everything if I wanted to. Um, or you can argue it in the sense that during the times of survival, like when the Bible was written, they needed to kill animals, to get through, I don't know, the, really harsh conditions. But now we live in a world where you don't need to kill animals at all, because we have all the research, all the science, all the nutritionists like Callum to allow us to see how we can live a healthy life that is ethical and reduces as much suffering as possible. So it's like, even if he did give you dominion to eat animals, why give in to that temptation? Is it truly Christian to be eating meat if you don't need to eat it, right? And it could also just be a test. So I think there's like every religion kind of like it gets mixed in with traditions almost, right? Especially with like religions like Islam, like it's like almost a tradition to consume lamb. But if we really backtrack to like the original saying and like the original word where it was interpreted 10, 20 centuries ago that we need to be consuming animals because it says it here, I think when you give room and opportunity to reinterpret what the Bible says, what the Quran says, what the, Bhagavad Gita says, you can kind of see it fit to have noble values in a way that shows, I think, just the basics, right? Healthy living, honest living, and being true to yourself and to people around you. And I think that was like the purpose of religions, but people, everyone has their own interpretations. Everyone has their own agendas. So there's so many ways you can look at it. But I think it's possible. Like if you know the material, it's possible to reinterpret it and allow someone to kind of re-examine their entire religion if they're open to it. So that's been my experience. But religion is a fun topic for me because it's just so like, I think it requires a lot of creativity to be able to like read the commandments, read the words, and try to really dissect what is being said.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. I have like a slight argument towards it as well, and I think it is more towards that. Obviously, everything on our planet is, let's say, it is there for us, and God's made it perfect for everybody. Then why is it that we are then, mutilating and genetically breeding to make it better because whatever God gave us wasn't good enough? So we then have to play God itself and then, make it better, like make cows more plump, make chickens bigger because it wasn't good enough in the first place.
That's a good point. That is a good point. And I would take it even further and say, if it was created for us to consume, why is it giving us so many diseases? Why do we need to cook it, first of all? Like, why do we need to cook all the meat? Like, why are we being so picky with, all right, we got to consume this muscle, make sure it's cooked so all the bacteria die, and then season it and all this stuff? Like, if it was truly made for us to eat, like a real carnivore or like a real omnivore, we would be eating it raw. And secondly, why would God give them the ability to feel pain? You know, like why is it so like, why do we feel guilty showing kids how animals are being killed if it was completely natural for us and if it was completely what God intended us to do, right? Versus like when you're eating completely plant based, you can freaking reverse diseases, you know? So it's like if you look at the actions and like the stories of people's lives based on their diet, I think the message, if you're like into spirituality, I think the message is pretty clear cut right there. You don't even need to read the book. You could just look at like what's happening. Like what happens to you if you eat all animals? What happens to you if you eat all plants? How does your mental health change? How does your physical health change? And how does the world around you change? So I think that's like the common denominator that a lot of religions can look at and see like how you interact with God's creatures, right, with his plants and animals, and how that impacts you and the environment around you. Because if you truly cared about God and God's creatures, you would be respecting it a little bit more, even if it means going out of your way and going out of your comfort zone. I think that's like what a true angelic soldier would do in that type of biblical story.
I think as well, like, I don't know who chose what animals we can and can't eat, but out of like the billions that there are, we've chosen 5 basically to consume and not the rest. So we're very picky about exactly which ones we want. And normally cows, chickens, lambs, you know, pig. And over here in Australia, kangaroo is a big one.
Oh shit! I did not know that.
Yeah,
Kangaroo
so kangaroos and crocodile meat is something very big. But it seems to be only the foods that are available in those regions that people have been farming for a very long time is the ones that we then choose to consume. And then let's say, for instance, you know, there's another animal in a different country, for instance, like Korea with dog meat, for instance. People find that so wrong. However, the Koreans, it's a tradition for them. So for them, it's normal. So we really choose what we eat on the basis of the region that we're in and what's been farmed for however many years. And that's that's how we work out exactly what we want, how we're going to eat it. Because there's obviously some countries will eat things different to everyone else. It's not the same kind of like 5 animals throughout the world.
Yeah, it's true. And it kind of goes back to our conversation on how like tradition shapes people's realities. They're not thinking what's right and wrong. They're not thinking what is the ethical stance. They're just thinking like, all right, this is the programming I was given based on my region, based on the time period I was born in, and based on the family and friends I was surrounded with. And that's how I think. And they'll just defend that matrix programming. They become agents of the matrix. Anytime you present veganism to them, they start having all these, deflections and arguments against it. But I think once you really, especially if you travel the world and see how different it is based on, the region, like you're saying, especially with dog meat, I that thing fires people up so quickly, especially when I see like Americans go there and find out that they're eating dogs, they turn into like, they're just like, oh, that's horrible. How could you do this? But it's like, you're eating beef, you're eating chicken, you're eating all this stuff. But it's like, it's beginning to crack. The matrix that they're in is beginning to crack because they're starting to see just by going to a different place around the globe, it can be so different and normalized. And then it just kind of confuses them. Like, how can this be normal to you? But it's because they've been programmed to think that way in their society. That's how the matrix works. And then you just got to question and point the finger at yourself to see, am I programmed? Am I also guilty? Am I also just a product of what society wanted me to consume for their own benefit? So yeah, it's very interesting when you find out what people eat, what kind of animals people eat around the world, especially when it's, when it disturbs someone that already eats animals.
Yeah, I think it's just the cultures we're brought up in and like the traditions that we are brought up in, and that's another heavy topic is culture and tradition, and obviously is what we've been doing for so long. as a cultural norm and traditional norm, is that still right in this day and age? Because obviously the cultures and traditions very incredibly important. They kind of shape who we are and connect us through like our history and our communities and the foods we've grown up, eating, and there's a lot of cultural heritage around that. Um, but obviously, cultural tradition doesn't make things necessarily right and doesn't mean that things shouldn't change, because obviously cultures are always evolving as well. So what would have been normal a few hundred years ago is not necessarily normal today, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just a kind of sign of progress. When it comes to eating animals, we have to weigh cultural and traditional practices against, like, I'm guessing, the ethical implications and the realities of modern animal agriculture as well. Because obviously we have more awareness now in this day and age than obviously the impact, the environmental impact and reproduction and ethical concerns and how things are tested and treated in the food industry, that it gives us the knowledge to kind of reevaluate what our traditions are.
Exactly. And I think it's so important because like traditions are just like what you're born with, and you never know if it's harming you in the long run or if it's going to benefit you in the long run. And I think usually it's a mix of both, but it's always important to see how your traditions compare to other people's traditions. And maybe there's a better tradition about going around your lifestyle. And it's just so, I think, especially as an adult, you have like a responsibility to kind of reevaluate who you are. Because, growing up as a kid, you might have been programmed to believe a certain way, to have a certain tradition, to have a certain culture, religion, whatever it may be. But as an adult, I think it's 100% your responsibility to figure out how you've been programmed and if it's something you truly want to accept or if it's something you might want to reconfigure and install an updated mental model of how to navigate the world.
Absolutely. I think also mentioning that, like, traditions can also always be they can always be adapted. It doesn't mean losing it entirely. You could always adapt, and you can still honor your culture and still make changes at the same time. Like, for instance, especially when it comes to food, like, there's a lot of traditional dishes and they can always be adapted into a plant-based dish, obviously allowing people to still kind of celebrate their heritage, but obviously aligns with like their new understandings and values. For instance, like, in the US you have Thanksgiving, but you don't like the only thing really there that is the meat is the turkey. Like, having an alternative to that, everything else near enough stays exactly the same.
Yeah, and it's really not that hard to veganize it. It's if you have creativity, you can figure out how to veganize it. I remember when they were telling me like, don't go to Japan. Japan has so much meat over there. I go to Japan and I go to like the first vegan restaurant I go to. They had like I was expecting like vegan fried chicken or like vegan beef. They had the like local Japanese things like jajori, chabu, uzario, and like it was just like vegan uzario. And I'm like, what the heck is uzario? But it was like some local Japanese meat dish that they veganized, and it was just like the whole menu was full of just like all these like exotic words that I've never seen in my life. And I'm just like, wow, they've really veganized all these like these traditional ancient Japanese dishes. And it's like, wow, it's like anywhere around the world, if you really go to like a nice, I mean, you don't have to go to a vegan restaurant, but it's like, it's just the fact that people can do it, right? You can create any traditional dish that you want and veganize it if you're creative enough. And I mean, if you think about it, we're already like making meat taste the way we want it to taste. We're not making meat the way meat tastes at all, because no one's going to eat a dead bird with a bunch of feathers and, blood and everything on it. No one's going to eat meat for how it actually tastes. We're going to season it with oils, with herbs, with spices, fry it, barbecue it. And these are all plant-based things that we're doing to it. All these ingredients that we're adding to the meat is plant-based. So that already in itself is like, in a way, we're kind of making the meat taste like plants. but we're just having like the texture of meat to have something to chew on. So it's like if we can make it taste the way we want it to taste, and we're primarily making it taste like plants, meat doesn't even taste good, arguably, in that scenario. So that just goes to show that you can make anything taste the way you want it to taste. Hence all these, like vegan alternatives when it comes to like meat, like jackfruit, and they're using like, soy and all this stuff to make it taste like an actual burger, because it's just so easy to do so if you know how to season it right. Because after all, we're just seasoning meat with plant-based ingredients. So it's not as hard as people think. I think people are just lazy, and they're just hoping that the restaurant they go to, like they'll go to an Arby's or like a steakhouse, and they're like, oh, there's no, the vegan option here. It just tastes like crap. But it's like, well, it's because they're not seasoning it right. But if you make it yourself, or you look up a simple recipe, it'll probably be cheaper for you, and it'll be healthier for you, and it's going to taste exactly the way you want it to taste once you understand how they season, a burger or whatever it is.
This is exactly how I kind of explain it when people are like, oh, what? Like, give me a meal and I like to veganize. And I'm like, what? Start with a chili. Everything in chili is plant-based apart from the beef. Like, and that is just ground beef. So take that out. Everything is plant-based, and stick in lentils instead. There's not a huge difference there. Like, the majority of the dish, a lot of the time with the sauces and that, is very much probably a plant-based dish, especially if you got your beans and other bits and pieces and spices, and it's normally just replacing one part of it, taking that away, and then adding something new. And that's not a huge ask or a huge change, because once you have a chili and it's all kind of boiled down, the lentils are kind of mushy, but also beef's kind of mushy, like both at the same time. But you've got all the flavorings and the seasonings around. It's just replacing those small aspects of the dish with something different. And it is literally just thinking of it like that when people are like, "Oh, what do I do?" And I'm like, take what you have on a day-to-day basis. Unless you're eating a completely carnivore diet, then I really can't help you, because I don't know what we're really going to be changing from. Like, if you're eating steak and nothing else, I don't know what I can really give you. That's because, especially when it comes to the carnivore diet, it is literally just a slab of meat, nothing else, no fruit, no veg, nothing else, no seasoning. It is just that. But like for most people on a very omnivorous diet, what they're eating on a day-to-day basis is very easily replicated on a plant-based diet, on a vegan diet, whether you want to do a whole foods diet, or like you want to use the vegan alternatives. It's completely up to you how you want to do it, but it's just kind of making those small little changes, because those small little changes obviously do have an impact, but at the same time they're not a huge difference from what you're consuming already.
Yeah, no, you hit the nail on the head right there. That's so true. It's really not that different. And I think what it comes down to is they might have tried, like, I don't know, like a tofu burger or something at one point, and now just because they had one vegan alternative that wasn't that good, they're just stereotyping every single vegan meat, vegan cheese, vegan recipe that's veganized their traditional food as just something that's going to be nasty. But it's like, it really depends on how you make it, and you can make it taste exactly the way you want it to taste. And it's really not that complicated. But I feel like what I've noticed is like a lot of these like steakhouses, they just don't put much effort into the vegan option, because most people come there to eat the meat. So it's almost like they're purposely trying to make the vegan option taste like shit. But when you go to an actual like vegetarian or vegan friendly restaurant, they always make it taste good. Versus like if you go to like, a meat heavy place, they don't put that much effort. Oh, sometimes they do put effort into it, but I feel like that kind of like that first initial taste of like a burger that they don't like, they just go, okay, now every vegan burger must taste like crap just because I had this one at Arby's. As far as I've noticed, because there's just so much like avoidance and so much like hate toward the vegan alternatives. And people don't realize that there's so many options. There's more options than that one bad experience that you might have had years and years ago. And even if it was a bad experience, it's like you also got to look at the ethical factor of it, right? Like it might not be perfect, but it's still better for the environment, better for the animals, better for your health. Like you got to like kind of weigh it out in terms of all the components that you're getting from eating that veganized version of it. Um, and yeah, I think it
I
comes
think as
back
well
to
with
tradition, that people want to defend their tradition, so they'll fight tooth and nail.
yeah, it's because people don't have the same reaction if they have a bad burger when it's made of meat. They'll be like, "Oh, I'll just have another burger at another
Exactly.
place." But when it's a vegan burger, they're like, "Oh, it all must taste the same." But you can have a really bad the comparison between like a Burger King a burger and a McDonald's burger is a giant difference. But if you have a bad experience at McDonald's, it's not going to stop you eating a burger in Burger King or a homemade one. But when it comes to a vegan option, they're like, "Oh, well, it all must be like this." But you can have a really bad experience somewhere with a meat option, and in other places, it's going to be incredible for some people. However,
Yeah.
when it does come down to like vegan option, they've just made their bias on that one meal that they've had, and that is there's confirmation bias there again.
Yeah. Yeah. It's all
And I
confirmation
think
bias.
it's just people make every excuse not to try something new, and because it is deep down in our culture and our tradition not to stray away from the norm. Um, but then again, if that was like that for the whole entire lifespan of our civilization, we wouldn't be eating what we're eating now. We would still be eating berries, fruit, and sometimes meat.
Yeah. Yeah. That is true.
I think
Yeah.
that actually brings us to the last one that somebody um, brought up, which was the natural human diet. And that always pops up on discussions about veganism, suggesting that humans are naturally meant to eat meat, and humans are omnivores, and our ancestors may ate meat. But I think that really kind of oversimplifies a very complex topic as well, because it's not just that happened a few thousand years ago. That's what we should do now. It was more complex than that back then.
Yeah. 100%. Um, I guess I could tell you my like response to this, because this is complex, and it's just so much more sophisticated than just saying that we're natural meat eaters. And I like kind of referencing the China study that's like become very popular, because it's um, kind of flipped the traditional convention that humans are omnivores and showed that we're actually herbivores, physiologically speaking. But I think what people mix and match is how we behave and what we physiologically are. Behaviorally, we can act like carnivores, we can act like omnivores, we can act like herbivores, we can even act like cannibals, like Jeffrey Dahmer if we want to. But physiologically speaking, the China study has shown that we are based off the physiology of an herbivore or frugivore. And although we can survive off of, a lot of different foods, the food that like our body thrives off of is just plants. So meat is like a survival food. Like if you're in the apocalypse and you needed to survive off of a bag of chips, like just tons and tons of like Lay's or whatever, you could probably survive off of chips and crackers. That's not like the optimal food for you, but you could survive off of that. It could be considered like a survival food. So there's a lot of foods out there that you can consume to survive, but they're definitely not optimal in the long run, right? Like you wouldn't be able to survive off of hot Cheetos for 10 years without getting some sort of disease. Um, it's funny. I actually had a roommate. This is like way back in college. It's a funny story. This guy's crazy. Like he like would only get his like paycheck like every month, and like a week before his paycheck, like he would just like load up on like some cheap food and try to just, make breakfast, lunch, and dinner, whatever that is, like whether it be rice and beans or whether it be crackers. And this one week, he loaded up on hot Cheetos from Costco, and he was just eating hot Cheetos like breakfast, lunch, and dinner because he didn't have money to afford any like real food. And at one point, this guy was like just shitting liquid red blood. Like it was disgusting. Like and it was like it was doing something to his intestines where he was bleeding internally, and it was just like, yeah, he was just shitting and pissing red stuff. And I was just like, dude, you got to stop this. You can't just be surviving off of that. Get some veggies. Um, but yeah, it's interesting. Like you could survive off a lot of foods, but it's not going to, help you thrive. So what I always tell people is like back in the ice age, perhaps where they just did not have access to, vegetables, they might have survived off of that, but that doesn't justify that it's the right food to be eating and it's the healthy food to be eating. And the other thing is, even if we were meant to eat meat, which we're not, but like even if we were meant to eat it, like why would you eat it when there's so many problems that are arising from it, when it comes to like ethics, when it comes to the environment. And the third thing is, what we did back then, because that's an argument that you probably hear all the time, right? Like, oh, we've been doing it for thousands of years, we've been consuming meat since the end of time. That's deductive reasoning. That's like you're looking at a pattern and you're just trying to repeat that pattern and saying, okay, well, we did it back then, therefore we're allowed to do it today. That's not logic and reason. That's just trying to find a pattern, right? It's kind of like we've been killing each other for thousands of years. We've been stealing for thousands of years. Therefore, we're allowed to steal. Is that the logic that you're going to be using? Is that the deduction that you've created? It doesn't make any sense in terms of ethics, in terms of health. Just because we did something back then does not mean we should be imitating what we did back there. And you're also just cherry picking what the cavemen did, right? You're not living in caves. You're not doing that. Why is it that you want to eat meat? Because the cavemen ate meat, but you're not living in a cave. You're on an iPhone instead, yeah, in a house. So it's like people will cherry pick it, not because they actually have thought the logic and reason through, but because they're just trying to find an excuse. And that might be an excuse that a lot of people in the matrix and that line of programming are regurgitating. So like, oh, well, everyone else is saying it, so I guess I'll say it too, because it must be logical. It must be a fact if enough people say it. And it's just so delusional to me when I hear that, because it's like, just because we've been doing it for thousands of years does not mean it's good, ethical, or noble at all. So those are my responses to it. I'm curious to see like if yours are similar, or if like there's something else that you add on to how to.
I think mine are very similar, because I think the argument about like what natural is often ignores, as you just said, modern realities. Like we're in a modern day and age, and also like our ancestors' diets varied massively, on depending on their geographical location, their climate, their available resources. Some ate meat, some others made, more plant-based foods like your berries and your grains. So there was no real single natural diet that applies universally throughout human history. Like everybody had differences, no matter where you were in the world and what you had. And from obviously a health perspective and numerous studies and health organizations, obviously having a well-planned like vegan diet now is nutritionally adequate for all stages of life. So it's not about, what your natural base, what you're basing natural as and like on your ancient practices, but it's what's healthy and sustainable in our current environment, in our current world, that's going to be the healthiest option for you. And also, they weren't mass producing meat like they weren't mass producing meat like we are today. So what we're doing now is far from natural. And obviously you're, driving to a shop, picking up a prepackaged piece of meat, driving home, cooking it. These people weren't cooking it. They were more likely eating it raw. And back then they kind of had to get used to doing that and also these people lived to about 30 years old. So, and we also live to around, so depending on your region, anywhere between 70 to in your 90s. So I think like we really have to kind of look at what we're really considering natural, because what we do now is far from.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. And like if they were consuming that much meat, especially raw meat, and living to 30 years old, what does that tell you? Like what like does that mean it's good for you? Does that mean you should be doing it? Is that what you want to live to 30 years old? um so it's just like you got to look at the variables, like just because they did something back then does not mean it's gonna work today. And like you said, the modern age, we have different needs and dietary um, choices based on our region, based on our time. So there's not like one universal diet that we can kind of all collectively agree on. It's really dependent on what is going to help you thrive the most. And also just what your physiology is designed for, given the environment that you're in. And that's really important to kind of understand the whole concept of how meat eating initially began and why it is completely irrelevant in today's time. Because once you understand the history and the science about how it started, you can understand why it's completely not needed today and it shouldn't be consumed.
Absolutely, I think it is very much people once again cherry picking exactly what they want to hear and what they need to know. Is very much taking certain parts but not living through the rest of what the ancestors did. So you're cherry picking one bit but won't live the same as them. So but I'd actually commend you more if you went and lived in a cave and just ate meat and nothing else. I'd be like, okay, the guy actually sticks by his ethics and his logic, but you don't. So it's very hit and miss depending who you speak to. I'm going to wrap this up in a second. However, I do have one last final question for you, the one I ask everybody that comes on the podcast, which is, you're feeling lazy. It's a long day. You get home and you're starving, but you don't want to put a lot of effort into cooking. What are you making for yourself? Something quick, easy. It can be nutritious.
Okay, I some of it got cut, but I think I heard the gist of it. So it's like, what would you eat if you are just too tired to cook?
Yeah, basically. No. So, what is your go-to quick and easy meal?
It's interesting. I actually meal prep a lot. So like I'll have like chia seed pudding. I'll have like fruits cut up. I'll have like stir fry, like everything like in my fridge. Like I meal prep it. So I always have something in my fridge that's like from the day before or a few days before that I can consume. But I guess for people that don't meal prep, that would want something quick and easy that's tasty. It's like, have your favorite fruit. Have like a trail mix of nuts. Um, that's like something healthy and quick that you can eat, and especially on the go too, right? Like whenever I go on a hike, I just pack a bunch of fruits. I see people packing like sandwiches and all this stuff. I'm like, dude, just pack some like bananas. Because first of all, it's so easy to just eat it and then throw it wherever you want to throw it because it fertilizes the soil, right? You don't have to worry about having like a burger with you and then you have to find the stupid trash can while you're on a hike or something. It's just a hassle. So I think sometimes the most convenient and quick food is actually the most simple food, which is just, fruits, nuts, seeds, that it's just perfect already the way it is. And it's biodegradable. So it's like, even if you can't find a trash can, like say that you're tired and you're like, I don't know, outside, you're so tired that you don't even want to walk to the trash can. You can just put it on the grass somewhere, or maybe not the grass, like kind of like in the soil somewhere where it's like actually going to be good for the environment. And it's just convenient. I think fruits are the most convenient foods that we can eat, and I think people overlook it because it's not televised as much as like a pizza or a hot dog on the TV screen, because there's so many marketing campaigns about that. But I think going back to like the simple roots of what our food is gonna give you an easy life in terms of food.
Absolutely. I completely agree with that. So, where can we find you?
Yeah. Well, on Instagram, I am Arjunius Official. You can find me on Instagram there. On TikTok, same thing. And on YouTube, I'm actually called The Vegan Knight. I used to be Arjunius, but it's a long story. I had to change my name on there, and I I'm on Facebook, but I'm not active on Facebook. That's also a long story, but yeah, mostly on Instagram and YouTube and TikTok. You could find me there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for you.
Absolutely, yeah. This is a great conversation, and thanks for everything you do and like your knowledge about nutrition. I think your videos are great and gonna go pretty far, man.